So as you recall, last time we looked at Common App, I'm not sure that Common App Prompt 2, which is essentially a catch-all prompt where you can write about just about anything as long as it's one thing. And we talked about Common App Prompt 2, which focuses on a failure, a setback, a challenge, sometime when things did not go smoothly or easily, and what you learned as a result from that. How did you grow, and what did you learn?
Oh, are you on the meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, started already?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, that's right.
So let's go on to and prompt 2, I think is a great prompt if you can write to it. I think I mentioned last year it kind of jumped up to the third most written to prompt. If you can't think of really a significant obstacle, a significant setback, significant failure, then it's not going to be a great prompt for you. So prompt 3 is another prompt that is, I think it's a really good one if you can write to it, but I think not everyone can. So the prompt is: reflect on an idea when you questioned or challenged a belief or an idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? So they're kind of asking you, when did you kind of stand up for something? Why did you do this? What happened? Some of you haven't yet had much of an opportunity to really stand up for something significant. So this may not be a great prompt for you yet. So it is open-ended, and it should reveal kind of one of your values, and what you yeah, I mean, as in all of these, you don't have to win. Says the answer to the final question about the outcome of your challenge need not be a success story. So you can look back and you can think and you can learn. It's more important that you stood up for something meaningful, stood up for something that was right. I suppose it's even possible that you stood up for something that was wrong, and in retrospect, you look back and you realized that you stood up for something wrong. Or you stood up for something and you said, boy, that was painful, that was expensive, that really cost me something. It says the belief or idea you explore could be your own, someone else's, or that of a group. So I actually think that this prompt is a little, I mean, different people interpret things differently. I think this prompt is somewhat constrained. So I think it generally needs to be kind of for a stronger essay, it needs to be kind of an important big picture. Okay, let me back out of that. Actually, I think the most important thing for this prompt is that I think in standing up for a belief or an idea, or in challenging someone's belief or idea, I think that you need to have risked a consequence, or you need to have believed that you risked a consequence. So I think an example is, and this is why I kind of backed out of that big idea. I think you can respond to this prompt if you have ever stood up for someone who was being bullied, who was being ostracized. Because if you did that, you were probably taking a pretty big social risk. You were probably risking that you too would be become bullied or become ostracized. So, I mean, there are big ideas in that, but it's a relatively small example that I think falls neatly into this prompt. Other things, I mean, if you've stood up against sexism, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, whatever, something where you've stood up in a way that maybe you were a little uncomfortable, or you kind of put yourself out there. I will say one last thing. If you recall back to that, the kind of the white Muslim personal insight question response, she could have written an essay similar to that, to this prompt, because she stood up on behalf of other Muslim people who were more identifiable than she was and subject to discrimination. And then at the end, she also mentioned her feminism. So I suppose if she had angled the essay in a different direction, she could have focused on that. Prompt number 4, I think, is also a pretty good prompt. I personally, so again, all prompts are equal. I happen to think some prompts are more equal than others. I happen to be particularly fond of 2, 3, 4, and 5. So prompt 4, describe a problem you've solved or a problem you'd like to solve. It can be an intellectual challenge, a research query, an ethical dilemma, anything that's of personal importance, no matter the scale. Explain its significance to you and what steps you took or could be taken to identify a solution. So a lot of students look at this and it can look kind of overwhelming, because this is like something you have to have solved, you have to have thought all the way through. This is a really good prompt. This can be a really good prompt for writing about community service or volunteering stuff that you've done. And then how would you do that? Because you'd put the volunteering or the community service within the context of the larger problem that you're attempting to solve. So let's say that you had participated in one of the community service trips to Ningxia. Depending on what you did and how you wanted to look at it, if you've been on any of those trips, you know that there are many, many, many really significant problems that people there face. So depending on what you looked at and what you wanted to solve, people there face terrible poverty. There are terrible issues with water and drought, sanitation issues, education issues, public health issues. You could frame it practically however you want it to. So you take some societal problem, and if you take that route, it's not important that you solved it. Like if you choose poverty, you probably haven't solved that yet. Focusing a little bit more narrowly kind of allows you to take it, I think, to take a better, more focused approach. So I had a couple of students last year who were involved in the same environmental organization that came out, that was an outgrowth of them going to China. And this organization basically focused on recycling in the village in China, promoting recycling, sorting, collecting trash, and doing things that would contribute to the composting, doing things that would contribute to building the health of the soil and removing the toxicity in the village, and ultimately might indirectly contribute to like the cleanliness of the water, sorts of things. So what's important with this is really that you did something. So you saw a problem and you tried to do something. You volunteered. It is entirely possible you did not solve it. Furthermore, it's entirely possible that you don't know all the steps to solve it. I mean, there are a lot of really important, really meaningful problems out there that you might be tackling, that you might be engaged with, that are tough to solve. So that part of the prompt is less important than that you're doing something, that you care about it, and that you're committing to doing more in the future. So I think there are different ways you can take this. You could focus on research, you could focus on a project you did, but I think that side of it allows you to show more about what you care about and what you've done. Introspective, share what you value. You can write about any issue you find important. 2 or 3 years ago, I had a student who had, unfortunately for her, been involved in very, very, very few community service or extracurricular activities. And so she's probably the only student I've worked with who her main Common App essay, this essay, was a big picture essay. So not really about things that she'd done, but it was about an issue that she cared about. So in her case, she wrote about felony disenfranchisement, which, if you don't know, in the United States, in many states in the United States, people who are convicted of a felony can lose their right to vote forever. So we literally have millions of people in the United States. We have millions of United States citizens who cannot vote. And there is huge disproportionality. They are overwhelmingly men of color. So overwhelmingly African-American men, Latino men. So there is a pretty strong element of racism to this issue. So that was something she was passionate about. She wrote about it. She managed to find some connection, some way to tie it to herself so that it wasn't just philosophical. And considering her GPA, which was extremely low, and the fact that she had almost no extracurricular activities or community service activities, and add to that the fact that I think she switched high schools in her senior year, she did really well. She got provisionally accepted to Purdue, which was sort of shocking given the other factors. Shockingly good. Yeah, and so third, you don't have to solve the problem, because if it's, I mean, if you're trying to do something about climate change, you are way ahead of 90% of the adults out there who aren't doing anything about it, much less solving it. And yeah, so it says be careful with opening or described. So you really want to use no more than a third of your essay to outline what the problem is. In many cases, if you say something's a problem, your application reader is going to say, okay, I got it. So last year I had a student who wrote about sexism being a problem in STEM and gender stereotypes being a problem in STEM. And initially she wrote this kind of long part about being in a, I may mention this before, being in a escape room and the boys pushing to the front, and then being in STEM classes, being the only girl, being computer science club, the only girl. And I suggested that she really abbreviate that part, because I really didn't think that she was going to have any application reader who was going to say, oh, come on, that's not a problem. Sexism and gender stereotype are not a problem in STEM. I just think at the kind of school she was applying to, people were going to say, okay, I get it. Move on to the next part of your essay. What did you do then? So you can look at these case studies. The New York Times every year publishes about 5 of these articles on work and work, money, and social class. They get a lot of responses. I think this one, Riz's chickens will attend Yale. I'm guessing they're not going to let him take his chickens with him to Yale. Who knows? Maybe. Honestly, I'm going to kind of skip over this, because I think, well, I will show this to you. I think that this essay, I think there's a problem with his essay, and I think the problem is that he talks too much about his father. I think generally it's kind of the kiss of death to talk too much about your father, your mother, your grandmother, well, other people in general, people in your family in particular. So I think I probably mentioned a couple years ago, UC directors panel, and they were joking about how the University of California had accepted a record number of grandparents because their grandchildren wrote so many, sorry, I'm trying to turn the light on. Their grandchildren wrote such great essays, so they had no choice but to take their grandparents in. Obviously, what were they saying? They were saying, like, you're not trying to get your grandparent into school, you're trying to get yourself. There's one other subtle thing. There's one other subtle problem about writing about your parents or grandparents. For all kids in general, for all college applicants in general, but arguably, especially for Chinese American students and Chinese students, your application reader is wondering who is pulling the strings. Are you a real candidate? Are you for real? Or are you a clever projection of your mother or father. I know you've met some of these students in school. You've met some of these paper tiger students in school. And so you're trying to distinguish yourself from students who, you know, are like 50% their mom doing things. So not writing about your father, mother, or grandparents is a good way to do that. So I'm gonna skip over this. You can look these up. I wanted to, there is one essay I kind of like. So Johns Hopkins publishes essays every year. They call them essays that work. Essays that worked, I'm sorry. And some of them I think are more about showing off Johns Hopkins than they are really showing you stuff. Some of them are like incredibly perfect. They're like absurdly perfect. But this I think is a reasonable example. So let's take it this. This is a student called Kaylee. In Pursuit of the Sublime. I'm not sure. I think they probably titled this, not her, but perhaps she did. So she wrote goal, 40,000. I wrote because it made me somebody else, somebody who mattered. The power of writing, I believed, existed solely in one's ability to pursue the sublime. So I wrote to create different, better manifestations of my life. I grew up dreaming and writing and thinking they were the same, about being a Hermione Granger with Harry as my sidekick, battling 20 Voldemorts, 20! My stories were dynamic. I was cool. Status, 5,000. My mom once joked that I should audition for the role of Cho Chang. I threw a chopstick at her. Cho Chang was weak, so terribly weak that Harry dumped her. I knew why she said it, though. I rarely existed in books, and when I did, I was the Cho Chang, the inconsequential, insignificant Asian girl who could never assert herself. In a fit of spite, I killed my Hermione, realizing I could never be her. Status, 1,000. Somebody once told me to read The Joy Luck Club, but I never bothered. A book about a bunch of Cho Changs couldn't possibly be sublime. Instead, I buried myself in the books hidden under my bed, away from mom, about girls in high school who didn't do anything besides fall in love. So to improve my own story, I decided to fall in love with the first boy to call me pretty. I was satisfied. Status, 8,000. Living life vicariously was comfortable and easy. Perhaps that's why at 15, I paid no mind to my grandpa's deteriorating health or my dad's anxiety, because these were not the kinds of pain I had ever read about. I didn't find them good enough to write about. So I went looking for better inspiration, for more mockeries of love, ways to validate my insecurities, and priorities that shouldn't have been labeled as such. It was all so cool that I couldn't stop writing about it. Status, 11,000. During this magnificent, glorious streak of writing, dreaming, and pretending, I learned that 40,000 words make a novel. I had to do it. Once I get published, everybody would get a taste of my sublimity. Mom and dad would be so impressed, I'd probably even become famous. Hence, I became fervently obsessed with word count and cared for little else. Status, 15,000. But then I turned 17 and finally began to process what I had experienced years earlier. I had been witness to my grandpa reduced to flesh and bones, but hardly any flesh, barely clinging to life in a maggot-infested hospital in Dengzhou, something I had forced myself to forget. Suddenly, I couldn't keep pretending that crafting a fictitious version of my life on paper could replace what is real. I erased everything. Status 0. I started over. I wrote about my real thoughts, my family, the times I was happy and the times I was not. I wrote about my grandpa. I showed Dad. I thought he'd be proud. He was not. What? You wrote this? Why? What are you trying to prove? Nothing. For the first time, nothing. I'm just writing about life. But you should keep that private. It's too revealing and distressing. It's not sublime. Sorry. Okay, let's go back. We didn't get cut off for very much. I think we essentially the father or the voice of a father, you should keep that private. It's too revealing and distressing. It's not sublime. I know. It's not sublime. I crumbled. Then came the summer before my senior year. I finally read The Joy Luck Club. In the entire novel, I didn't come across a single Cho Chang. What took the place of sublimity instead were real people, mothers and daughters who breathe and hurt and love. I laughed and cried and began to write. Status not counting anymore. I don't write to create the next Hermione, become the best cliche. Oh, shoot. Sorry about the screen. There it is. Okay. Sorry, let me go back. I laughed and cried and began to write. Status not counting anymore. I don't write to create the next Hermione, become the best cliche, or impress mom or dad. I write to express the thoughts that are most real to me, ones I cannot confine any longer. I'm real and I care about being real. That is my power, not just as a writer, but as a person. So this is certainly not a perfect essay. Anybody have any, and probably has, maybe a few too many cultural stereotypes. Maybe have any thoughts about things that you either liked or you didn't like about this essay? Okay. So I think what I like most about this essay is I think that the writer, I think she expresses growth and she expresses individuality. She expresses kind of a change in what's important to her. I think that the status device, I mean, it's kind of icing on the cake. I think that is pretty and kind of an interesting device that she uses. But I think sometimes it can be hard to find great examples that seem kind of relatable. But let's go back to this presentation. So the New York Times ones you can find. They have them for every year. They go through this again. You know, we can all kind of draw different conclusions from the same essay. So that was what we were supposed to have finished last time. So let's go on. Oh, and so I don't know if I finished saying this, but basically, Johns Hopkins essentially every year publishes this essays that worked. And so they have a certain number, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 essays each year. And I think they're great essays. Some of them I think are almost too perfect to be that helpful. They're incredibly well written, so they can be kind of daunting or intimidating. And I think your first task as a writer is simply to come up with a reasonable idea, and then your second task is simply to kind of try to create a crummy, first draft, and then continue moving forward from there, rather than getting overwhelmed by this trying to create these perfect essays. The other thing that I think that some of these essays do, I think sometimes the essays that the schools share, so Johns Hopkins shares, Connecticut College has something, Hamilton College does, Tufts does, some others. A lot of times they like two of those strong UC essays. I think a lot of them showcase students who have unusual backgrounds. And so I think for someone who has a less unusual background, that can seem less applicable. And I think sometimes the schools do it to just show how, look at us, we're so diverse, we have all these different people, which is great, but doesn't necessarily help you write your essays. Okay, so last time we looked at those Common App prompts 1 through 4. And really, I think those have like 3 of the best prompts in them, 2, 3, and 4. Let's look at 5, 6, and 7, and I'm going to tell you why 5 is a great prompt and 6 and 7 are terrible prompts. Okay, so Common App prompt 5 is a really good prompt. Discussion, accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth and a new understanding of yourself or others. So in this one, a lot of students kind of look at this part of it and they get kind of hung up on this beginning part of it. But really what's important about this is, personal growth and perhaps a new understanding of yourself and others. But really growth is the central theme of this prompt. And it's the reason why it's such a great prompt. It's also the reason why it can be pretty hard to write to. So you can explore an event or achievement marked a milestone in your personal development. And again, your essays are not the place where you're highlighting perfection. You're kind of highlighting growth. It's, let me look at this. I think this is 6. Okay, yeah. It's very difficult to show growth if you don't show flaws. I mean, you can't really grow from being perfect to being more perfect. I mean, I suppose maybe you could, but that seems kind of implausible. So really, you grow from being in a, I guess from being more flawed to less flawed. You know, you grow in one facet, in one area. It's perfectly fine to make mistakes. It makes you more human in your essays. As you probably know, vulnerability is something that generally causes us to like people more. I mean, you don't want your essay to be just nothing more than a bunch of neuroses or weaknesses, but it's easier to highlight growth if you show a conflict, a weakness, a struggle somewhere in the process. So this is a great essay prompt. And the other thing it's not mentioned in these other points. So I think about an activity. Think about an extracurricular activity or a community service activity that you've done over a period of time. I've had students who've written about something they've done for 2, 3, 4 years. Something you did since you were a freshman or something. If you choose something like that, then it's pretty easy to showcase growth. You may need to narrow your horizon. You probably can't cover 3 or 4 years in one essay, but you can kind of zoom in on the most important bit or the most important bits. And honestly, I think it's more credible to choose. It's more credible to show slow evolution or slow change rather than kind of overnight some epiphany. A light switch was flipped, and then all of a sudden you were different. One day you had no idea, the next day everything made sense. You know, most things don't really work that way. So showing things over time can help. One last thing about this prompt. So I said it was hard to write to. The focus of this is really on growth, and it's hard to find enough ways to write about your growth. It's reflection rather than description or kind of other things. So if you try to write an essay to Common App prompt 5 and you can't quite pull it off, it just becomes too much, too onerous to talk about growth. What you'll find is that you can fall back to Common App Prompt 1, which is essentially anything as long as it's one thing. So if you want to talk about, so last year I had a student who wrote about her growth through organizing a TEDx event at her school, or her involvement with TEDx events at her school over a period of time. If she had found that she could not have highlighted her growth, she could have fallen back on writing to prompt 5, I guess, about how meaningful those TEDx events were to her. So essentially kind of the same topic, but if she had written to, writing to prompt 5, huge onus, huge pressure on growth, huge payoff. In fact, she wrote a great essay to this topic. If she hadn't been able to do this, then her backup could have been to fall back to prompt 1 and focus on why this event had been very meaningful to her. Subtly different take. And this one, I think, last time I said, no, I think this one might have dropped out. This one dropped out of the top 3, but it used to be in the top 3 in terms of the most popular ones. Okay, prompt 6, describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? I am going to urge you to think twice, thrice, perhaps 4 times before you choose this prompt. Why? Why do I dislike prompt 6? This prompt is a lot like UC Personal Insight question 6 that asks you about an academic subject that inspires you. The way that Common App Prompt 6 is worded, it is very difficult. It's very difficult to answer this prompt in a way that doesn't involve an academic interest. And if you respond to an academic interest in prompt 6, that creates a problem with your application. What problem does it create for your application? The supplemental essays that you write for individual colleges that you're applying to, individual universities you apply to, the most common type of supplement that you'll write is either a why college essay or a why major at college essay. So why NYU? Why Boston University? Why Cornell? The Cornell one's a little more common. Why Penn? And some schools have both why school and why major. So these supplemental essays that you're submitting to schools include overwhelmingly academic information, or largely provide academic information. Therefore, if you focus your Common App essay on academic information, you will have little to no chance to show another dimension of yourself to most colleges or schools. So you lose the chance to show a side of yourself engaging or involving with community service. A side where you're showing personal growth. A side that's set against extracurricular activities that are the most important to you. And so on and so on and so on. So that's the reason why you should generally avoid this prompt. I suppose it is possible that there might be a topic, idea, or concept that totally grabs you, that's not academic. So for example, I think a few years ago, Johns Hopkins had one of the essays that worked, and the person wrote about loving to work on cars, tearing apart car engines, cars, rebuilding them, and that aligned with the person's interest. I think it was in mechanical engineering, but the person really talked about it being hands-on, and so it was kind of different. But I think if you look at the way this is worded, topic, idea, or concept, even that, I don't really know. I don't know if it actually addresses the prompt. So if in doubt, I would say avoid this. So enthralls you, passionate about. So if you don't, one reason why you might choose to write to this prompt is if you don't have a lot of non-academic things to write about, then maybe this would be okay. Prompt 7 is just kind of like an anything prompt. Share an essay on any topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written, one that responds to a different prompt, or one of your own design. Again, I think this is a prompt to be wary of. You don't want to just slop something you've already written into your Common App essay. That's kind of an invitation to disaster, to take something you happen to have already done and just kind of use it for the most important college essay that you'll have, that will go to probably most, if not all, the private schools and some of the public ones you apply to. So if you're a very capable writer, if you have a really strong idea for something and you think it really highlights your strengths, you can go for this. I would check it out. Check it out with your editor, and I guess kind of a yellow light to sort of proceed with caution. I think that this just doesn't give you any. This just doesn't give you any guidance. And I think what colleges are trying to do with prompts is they're trying to give you some guidance. They're trying to help you write better essays. So if you have a short story to share that doesn't fit into the options above, so generally, I mean, between prompt 1 and some of the other prompts, you can really fit a lot into them. And most colleges don't really like creative writing. So comedy, sketch, or poem. No matter what, you do need to provide substance, and you do need to engage your application reader and to get them interested in you and wanting you to go to their school. I think the other thing to avoid with this prompt is if you wanted to write about sort of an everything essay about you, like an autobiography or greatest hits or something, it would seem like it would go under this. But that's kind of an invitation for a weak application essay. So at the Common App, you have these 7 prompts to write to. You need to write one essay that is 650 words maximum. It's going to go to most schools most of you will apply to besides the UCs. And no matter what, you want to make sure that you are communicating substance, that you're highlighting something that your application reader is going to value and that is going to strengthen your application, that will make you a 3-dimensional person. Just about, as we talked about with the UC personal insight questions, just about every, no matter what prompt you write, just about every essay highlights growth and learning and has some reflection. So here, what's made you grow as a person? How are you unique? Have some self-analysis, not just kind of what happened, but so what did that mean? What did you learn? Yeah, I mean, you can, just because I happen to like 3 of the prompts, or 4 of the prompts more than the others, doesn't mean you have to. You need to find the prompt that really coincides and overlaps with the best thing for you to write to. So I think no matter what, initially there's just some brainstorming and like what could you write to? And some of you may not be in a great place to do that now because of you're still in the thick of your junior year, battling out for grades, APs coming next month, and so on. But once summer gets here, time's going to start passing pretty quickly, and when the fall comes here, it's going to pass really, really quickly. So don't delay. Okay. So as many of you know, there is this other application system. In fact, there are so many application systems, so little time. For California students or students who are applying in California, there is the UC system, there's the Cal State system. Cal State system, no essays. Easy peasy. UCs, we talked about that. Common App, currently includes, as we said, I think about 822 colleges and universities, so it includes an awful lot. The new kid on the block, oh, and then before talking about the CAS, there are some schools that use their own proprietary application systems. So if you apply to Georgetown, you have to use the Georgetown application system. If you apply to MIT, you need to use their own application system. They don't use anyone else's. The new kid on the block among the larger kind of cross-school application systems is the Coalition for Access, Affordability, and Success, which people shorten to either CAAS or Coalition. I think the Coalition currently includes about something like 130 schools. Most of those schools also accept the Common App. Since the Common App is easier to use, it's more tested. If you have a choice between using the two, generally you want to choose the Common App. But there are some schools that you might apply to that you can only use the Coalition. So for example, if you apply to the University of Washington at Seattle, I think at present that only includes the Coalition. You have to use the Coalition. If you apply to University of Texas Austin or Texas A&M, and I can't remember the full list because it changes. The ones that only take the Coalition, it changes over time. Oh, okay. Actually, another pretty important school is UIUC, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So those are some examples. If you're going to apply to those schools, you have to use the Coalition for those applications. However, if you apply to UIUC, actually UIUC has their own, they have their own essay supplements. They do not ask for, nor do they take the main Coalition essay. So in that case, if you're just using it for UIUC, you don't even care about the Coalition essays. Okay. There are these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Coalition essays. A lot of them are kind of similar to Common App essays. For most of you, unless the Coalition is extremely important to your application, most of you are going to use this green prompt at the bottom. Submit an essay on the topic of your choice. But wait, I speak from two sides of my mouth. Why would I tell you with the Common App to not use that prompt, but with the Coalition app to use that prompt? I'm telling you that because I suggest that for most of you, the Common App essay is going to be the more important essay. And the Coalition essay is going to be less important. So for most of you, you will be taking your Common App essay and you will be shortening it somewhat to make it fit within the confines of the Coalition essay. Common App gives you, it's one essay, maximum of 650 words. Coalition gives you you write one essay, and it's a maximum. University of Washington has a maximum of 500 words, so it's 150 words less. Most other schools, it's suggested 500 to 550 words. So what do a huge number of students do? They take their Common App essay, they shorten it to 500 words if they're applying to University of Washington, Seattle. and they use this prompt 5 for the coalition. Let's take a brief look at your other options. Number 1, tell a story from your life. Describe an experience that either demonstrates your character or helped to shape it. It's a little bit like Common App Prompt 1, where it asks for something about an especially meaningful experience or identity or something like that. It's a bit like that. So that's not a bad prompt if you choose to write to it. Number 2, describe a time when you made a meaningful contribution to others in which the greater good was your focus. Discuss the challenges and rewards of making your contribution. That is a lot like UC Personal Insight Question 7, where you did something to improve the community, your school or community or something. Prompt 3 is an inversion of a Common App prompt. It says, has there been a time when you've had a long cherished or accepted belief challenged? How did you respond? How did the challenge affect your beliefs? So this is kind of, I guess this is sort of testing for open-mindedness and I suppose maybe logical thinking. So this flips the Common App prompt 3, where you challenged a belief or idea here. It's when was one of your ideas or beliefs challenged. Prompt 4 is a horrible, horrible, horrible prompt. What is the hardest part of being a teenager now? What's the best part? What advice would you give a younger sibling or friend, assuming they listen to you? Please, I beg of you, please, 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 do not write this prompt. Submit an essay on a topic of your choice. For most of you, this is what you should do and what you will do. Not only is prompt 4 kind of a terrible prompt that I think would have a tendency to lead to terrible essays, but among all of the Common App and Coalition essay prompts, Coalition prompt 4 sticks out like a sore thumb. So for some reason, if you were applying to a lot of Coalition schools and only 1 or 2 Common App schools are kind of less important to you, maybe you would end up going the other way. Maybe you would write for this Coalition or CAS essay prompt and then plug that into that Common App prompt 7 essay on the topic of your choice. If you wrote to that 1, 2, or 3, the people at Common App schools, they probably wouldn't notice. They probably wouldn't, it wouldn't really strike them as being strange. You could probably map it. But if you wrote to this prominent, this Coalition or CS4, that is such a striking prompt that no one in the world would ever doubt that you had just recycled a Coalition essay to a Common App prompt. So let me check and see. I just want to check in and see if anybody had any questions now. Questions. Okay. So there was one other There's one other example that I wanted to show you. So I'll say in general, again, um, there are a lot of great essays that people have put on the internet, like Johns Hopkins, people like that. Take everything with, like everything on the internet, anything anybody says, take it with a grain of salt. And I think some of the application essays that you see, you need to take with a grain of salt. Especially when you're thinking initially about kind of constructing or like kind of getting started. They can be overwhelming. They can lead you to kind of perfectionism, and I think sometimes they can kind of lead you in the wrong direction. A lot of these essays tend to really focus on extended metaphors and whatnot. But I wanted to show one other example. So this was another example that I think is actually, I think this is a pretty interesting essay. So this happens to come from collegeessayguide.com. College Essay Guy has written a book that I think is pretty good, and I've tried to synthesize some of his ideas into this. But let's take a look at this. So this is called Home. And as I enter the double doors, the smell of freshly rolled biscuits hits me almost instantly. I trace the fan blades as they swing above me, emitting a low repetitive hum, resembling a faint melody. After bringing our usual order, the tailgate special, to the table, my father begins discussing the recent performance of Apple stock with my mother, myself, and my older 11-year-old sister. Bojangles, a southern establishment well known for its fried chicken and reliable fast food, is my family's Friday night restaurant, often accompanied by trips to Eva Perry, the nearby library. With one hand on my breaded chicken and the other on Nancy Drew, Mystery of Crocodile Island, I can barely sit still as the thriller unfolds. They're imprisoned! Reptiles! Not the enemy's boat. As I delve into the narrative with a sip of sweet tea, I feel at home. 5, 6, 7, 8. As I shout the counts, 19 dancers grab and begin to spin the tassels attached to their swords while walking heel to toe to the next formation of the classical Chinese sword dance. A glance at my notebook reveals a collection of worn pages covered with meticulously planned formations, counts, and movements. Through sharing videos of my performances with my relatives or discovering and choreographing the nuances of certain regional dances and their reflection on the region's distinct culture, I deepen my relationship with my parents, heritage, and community. When I step on stage, the hours I've spent choreographing, creating poses, teaching, and polishing are all worthwhile, and the stage becomes my home. Set temperature, calibrate, integrate, analyze. Set temperature, calibrate, integrate, analyze. This pulse mimics the beating of my heart, a subtle rhythm that persists each day. I come into lab, whether I'm working under the fume hood with platinum nanoparticles, manipulating raw integration data, or spraying a thin platinum film over pieces of copper. It's in lab 304 in Hudson Hall that I first feel the distinct sensation and I'm home. After spending several weeks attempting to synthesize platinum nanoparticles with a diameter between 10 and 16 nanometers, I finally achieve nanoparticles with a diameter of 14.6 nanometers after carefully monitoring the sulfuric acid bath. That unmistakable tingling sensation dances up my arm as I scribble into my notebook. I am overcome with a feeling of unbridled joy. Styled in a t-shirt, shorts, and a worn dark green lanyard, I sprint across the quad from the elective, speaking Arabic through the Rusius method to knitting Nirvana. This afternoon is just one of many at Governor's School East, where I've been transformed from a high school student into philosopher, thinker, and an avid learner. While I study at GS at Meredith, while I attend GS at Meredith College for Natural Science, the lessons learned and experiences gained extend far beyond physics concept, serial dilutions, and toxicity. I learned to trust myself, to have difficult yet necessary conversations about the political and economic climate. Governor's School breeds a culture of inclusivity and multidimensionality, and I'm transformed from a girl who is hardworking or science girl to someone who indulges in the sciences, debates about psychology and the economy, and loves to swing and salsa dance. As I form a slip knot and cast on, I'm at home. My home is a dynamic and eclectic entity. Although I've lived in the same house in Cary, North Carolina for 10 years, I've found and carved homes in communities that are filled with and enriched by tradition, artists, researchers, and intellectuals. While I may not always live within a 5-mile radius of Bojangles or in close proximity to Lab 304, learning to become a more perceptive daughter and sister, to share the beauty of my heritage and to take risks and redefine scientific and personal expectations will continue to impact my sense of home. This student, I think, this essay takes on an awful lot and arguably kind of takes on kind of too much. But I think in her case, she's kind of trying to do that to make us get that she's interested in many different kinds of things. I think arguably, I think especially the first paragraph could probably have been cut because she's probably pretty darn young. For me, I mean, I liked this, I guess, bit about reading and getting kind of drawn into reading. But it started, for me, it started coming alive, I think, more with the second paragraph. And honestly, probably because she started talking about choreography, which is, I think, kind of a pretty unusual. Perhaps of all the things she talks about, doing choreography is maybe the most unusual. But despite having kind of a mishmash of different subjects, I think this author kind of pulls it off better than most. And let me see, there was one other one that I thought was, okay, that's the same one. Okay, so this one I also thought was it's kind of an interesting, a different take example. So again, you don't need to title your essays. I think these were probably titled by the people who've used these to keep them straight. So this is the Not Black Enough East Asian Influenced Bibliophile. Growing up, my world was basketball. My summers were spent between two solid black lines. My skin was consistently tan in splotches and ridden with random scratches. My wardrobe consisted mainly of track shorts, Nike shoes, and tournament t-shirts. Gatorade and Fun Dip were my pre-game snacks. The cacophony of rowdy crowds, ref whistles, squeaky shoes, and scoreboard buzzers was a familiar sound. I was the team captain of almost every team I played on, familiar with the X's and O's of plays, commander of the court, and the coach's right-hand girl. But that was only me on the surface. Deep down, I was an East Asian influenced bibliophile and a young adult fiction writer. Hidden in the cracks of a blossoming collegiate level athlete was a literary fiend. I devoured books in the daylight. I crafted stories at nighttime. After games, after practice, after conditioning, I found nooks of solitude. Within these moments, I became engulfed in a world of my own creation. Initially, I only read young adult literature, but I grew to enjoy literary fiction and self-help. Kafka, Dostoevsky, Brandon, I have no idea how to pronounce it, Csikszentmihalyi. I expanded my bubble to Google Plus, Google Plus. So sorry, disappeared in April. Critique groups, online discussion groups, blogs, writing competitions, and clubs. I wrote my first novel in 5th grade, my 2nd and 7th grade, started my 3rd and 9th grade. Reading was instinctual, writing was impulsive. I stumbled upon the movies of Hayao Miyazaki at a young age. I related a lot to the underlying East Asian philosophy present in his movies. My own perspective on life, growth, and change was echoed in his storytelling. So I read his autobiographies, watched anime, and researched ancient texts, Analects, The Way, Art of War. Then I discovered the books of Haruki Murakami, whom I now emulate in order to improve my writing. Like two sides of a coin, I lived in two worlds. One world was outward, aggressive, noisy, invigorating. The other, internal, tempestuous, serene, nuanced. Internal and external conflict ensued. Many times I was seen only as an athlete and judged by the stereotypes that come with it. Self-centered, unintelligent, listens to rap. But off the court, I was more reflexive, empathetic, and I listened to music like Florence and the Machine. I was even sometimes bullied for not acting black enough. My teammates felt that my singular focus should be basketball and found it strange that I participated in so many extracurriculars. But why should I be one-dimensional? I'd always been motivated to reach the pinnacle of my potential in whatever I was interested in. Why should I be defined by only one aspect of my life? I felt like I had to pick one world. Then I had an ACL injury, and then another, and then another. After my first ACL surgery, my family and I made the decision to homeschool. I knew I wanted to explore my many interests, literature, novel writing, East Asian culture, and basketball equally. So I did. I found time to analyze Heart of Darkness and use my blog to instruct adult authors how to become self-published authors. I researched Shintoism, read dozens of books on writing and self-improvement. My sister and I had been talking for a while about starting a nonprofit focused on social awareness, education, and community outreach. Finally, we had the time to do it. While basketball has equipped me with leadership skills and life experiences, it's only one part of who I am. As a socially aware, intellectual and introspective individual, I value creative expression and independence. My life's mission is to reach full potential in order to help others reach their own. This is another student who takes on kind of arguably too much in this essay, but manages to kind of somehow manages to pull it off. But I think, trying to show these, basically these two different aspects, and then arguably, it seems like after she stopped, it looks like her injuries stopped her from playing basketball. It's hard to tell for good. I thought she said something about collegiate level basketball, but I guess not. So anybody have any questions? So these are a couple places that you can look at for ideas, but I think more important, honestly, more important than finding external examples is doing your own brainstorming and thinking about what are some possible things that you could write about. It's a lot less important what other people have written about. Can I write something as good as what they've written in their finished, published version? Probably not with your first draft. But only you know what you've done. Only you know what's in your mind. So, and kind of like, yeah, your history, what's important to you. So as you go through this application process, you are going to work with your Ivy Max counselor and your editor, and they're going to help you with taking your ideas and refining them and improving your drafts while maintaining your voice and maintaining your personality. But the hardest part of the whole process is, I think, the pre-writing, the brainstorming, and writing a first draft. I may have mentioned this before. There is a pretty famous local writer, Anne Lamott, and she's written a writing book called, I think it's Bird by Bird, or Bird Preposition Bird. I think it's Bird by Bird. And she has this mantra. She calls it shitty first drafts. And so, in other words, when you write your first draft, your perfectionism should be the farthest thing in the world from your mind. You just need a draft. So, at any rate, I've enjoyed the chance to work with you. Your focus for the rest of your junior year is finishing out the year solidly. As you get towards the end of the year, you're going to want to touch base with potential recommenders, and good luck on your AP exams and all of that. And then over the summer, then start thinking about these application essays. Yeah, and we will share the PowerPoint presentation. So thank you very much. Have a glorious rest of the Easter. rest of Easter. And have a nice evening.